is Note Taker 6 on photosynthesis. Before we begin talking about the process of photosynthesis and why plants have to undergo photosynthesis, we need to look at the cross-section of a leaf. Now, a cross-section would be looking at the leaf through the side of the leaf. And in the picture here, the very top part would be the top of the leaf. The very bottom part of the picture is the bottom of the leaf. So if I could cut a leaf in half, look into it, and of course if I had microscopes for eyes to be able to see all the cells, these are the layers I would see inside of the leaf. We're going to go over the definition of each of these parts. The epidermis of the leaf is the protective outer layer. Now in class, I want you to look at the word wall, and the prefix epi means outer, and the root word derma actually means skin. So the epidermis is the outer skin of the leaf, both top and bottom. And on the bottom of the leaf, it's going to have little openings called stomata and the little guard cells that surround it. So with these stomata, they are openings on the underside, and they allow CO2, which is carbon dioxide, to go into the leaf, because that's one of the ingredients that is needed for photosynthesis to occur, and it will allow O2, oxygen, and water vapor to leave the leaf. The guard cells are going to be these little bean-shaped cells on either side of the stomata, and they control the opening and closing of that stomata by either swelling or shrinking. And they will do this to be able to control that exchange of gases, CO2 in and O2 out. The mesophyll is the middle part of the leaf. The word meso, or the prefix meso, means middle, and that is on the wall in the classroom. And if you could think of fill as the filling inside, so mesophyll is the middle filling. So everything between the top epidermis and the bottom epidermis is all considered the mesophyll. Inside of the mesophyll, we have the top layer where cells are packed really densely together, and this layer called the palisade layer will contain cells that are filled with structures called chloroplasts. Now the chloroplasts are going to be the actual structure that photosynthesis is going to take place in. This is where sunlight is absorbed. This is where the CO2 will go to when it enters the leaf, and it's also where the water will lead to once it enters through the roots of the plant. Now, I mentioned that the chloroplasts will also absorb sunlight, and that is because they are filled with chlorophyll. Chloro is the prefix, which means green, and fill, if you think of filling, so chlorophyll would be the green filling inside of the chloroplast, and this pigment that's inside will absorb the sunlight, and that will actually happen during our first part of photosynthesis. Before we talk about the process, we're going to talk about how it all began. Now, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years ago, the Earth was not a very nice place to live. The atmosphere, the air that is all around us, was filled with poisonous gases. A lot of that would be carbon dioxide, and these poisonous gases were given off by all of the volcanic activity during that time. Well, first life form popped up, and they do think that, or scientists think that first life form was bacteria and algae, and they were able to live because they found a way, a process called photosynthesis, where they could absorb the sunlight and use those poisonous gases, that CO2 in the atmosphere, to make food source for themselves. And in exchange, they gave off this waste product called oxygen. And over millions of years, as more and more bacteria and algae released oxygen, the atmosphere started to change. There was less poisonous gases, more oxygen, and eventually that allowed for oxygen-breathing creatures to evolve. The process of photosynthesis is actually a very simple one, and I'm going to relate it to a recipe. And we'll talk about this more in class, and you'll hear me talk about the recipe of photosynthesis. But with the recipe, if you were to look in a cookbook, the first thing you would notice that comes in a recipe are the ingredients that are involved. So with photosynthesis, we're going to have 3 ingredients. We need sunlight, we need water, and we need carbon dioxide. Now, the first part of photosynthesis is going to use the water, and it's going to take in the sunlight. And if you think about it, what part of the day does this part of photosynthesis happen in? It would have to be during the day when the sun is out, because this is the part where they're absorbing the sunlight. So in every good recipe, we have steps that we have to follow when we're mixing up these ingredients. So the first thing is that the chloroplasts that are filled with chlorophyll are going to absorb the sun's energy, and it's going to change it from a light energy into a chemical energy. So it's going to make a molecule of chemical energy, and that molecule is called ATP. That's abbreviation for much longer words. You don't need to know those words until high school. So first step in photosynthesis, sunlight's absorbed and it's changed into chemical energy, which is called ATP. The second step of photosynthesis is that water needs to be absorbed. So water is going to enter through the roots, make its way up through the stems, and it's going to end up at the leaves. Here in the leaves, it's going to be broken down into its parts. So if you've ever heard of water referred to as H2O, it means it has 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. So those 3 molecules are going to break apart from each other. And then we're going to move into the second part of photosynthesis. The second part of photosynthesis can happen at any time during the day and night. This is when the carbon dioxide is going to enter the leaf through the little openings on the bottom called the stomata. And just like the water, the carbon dioxide, which is CO2, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen, it's going to be broken up into parts. So at this point, we have all these H's from the water, we have all these C's from the carbon dioxide, we have all these O's floating around from both the water and the carbon dioxide, plus we have all these little molecules of ATP all floating around inside the leaf. And then we're going to have a chemical reaction occur. They're going to actually start to attach to each other in a different way. And they are going to make a sugar called glucose, and that's going to be C6H12O6. And we are going to have some waste product that the leaf is going to make. There's going to be a few oxygen left over that's going to leave through the leaf and then into the atmosphere, and we will use that oxygen. Now, I don't know why the second part of photosynthesis is so special other than the fact that that's when the sugars are made, but somebody decided to give it a name. So the actual part of photosynthesis when the sugar is made is called the Calvin cycle. We've got the how, but we need the why, to why plants do photosynthesis. It's for food. On the last note taker, we talked about one of the needs of all living things is energy. Every living thing needs energy. Well, plants get their energy directly from the sun by making a food source from that sunlight. The plants will then take the sugar when it's needed. They will break it down to release the energy so that they can function. They'll do more photosynthesis, they'll grow, they'll reproduce. Now, for the energy to be released from the sugar molecule, we have to take photosynthesis and we're going to reverse it. The plant is going to need a little bit of oxygen, and that little bit of oxygen is going to break down that sugar. Everything's going to happen in a reverse chemical reaction, and we're going to end up with a little bit of energy released that the plant can use. Now, respiration does not occur just in a plant. Respiration also occurs in animals. When we breathe in oxygen and we eat carbohydrates, which are sugars, when we eat and breathe in that oxygen, we have a chemical reaction happening inside of us that breaks down those sugars to release energy for us. Now, with a plant, however, they have a problem. They can't just get up and walk to the pantry to get food whenever they want it. So plants have to plan ahead, and they have to take some of these sugars and they have to store them up for the time of the season when they're not going to have a lot of water, they're going to have shorter days and not as much sunlight. So they are going to change some of these sugars into starches, which are more stable, and they're going to store them in the roots, in the stems, and the leaves. And then come wintertime, that is how your plant survives, because the leaves fall off, can't do photosynthesis, but they can survive because they've stored up food. So just as a review, when winter happens, as fall sets in, so right now, fall's here, we're getting cooler temperatures. With the cooler temperatures, it kind of tells plants, it's a signal to plants to go ahead and stop photosynthesis. So plants are going to start to form a cork barrier where the leaf meets the stem that it attaches to. And that cork barrier, like the cork in a wine bottle, it prevents liquid from moving past it. So water can no longer get into the leaf. Well, there's a problem. Water was one of our ingredients needed for photosynthesis. So as soon as water is blocked, the plant can no longer do photosynthesis. So the chlorophyll that's in plants are going to start to break down. So the leaves are going to change color because the green pigment is breaking down, and it's letting all those other colors that are always in a leaf, you just can't see them, they are get a chance to shine through right before the leaf dies and falls off the tree. So during the winter, the trees will survive on their starches that they have saved up in the roots and the stems. Here on the last slide of the video, we have photosynthesis in a nutshell. This is the chemical equation for photosynthesis. For a plant to make one molecule of sugar, so one little molecule of food for itself, it has to have 6 carbon dioxide molecules. It has to take in 6 water molecules and the light energy from the sun. They're all going to work together like the steps in an ingredient. They're going to mix, or steps in a recipe, they're going to mix together. And we're going to end up with one sugar, which is your C6H12O6. That's called glucose. And we're going to get some waste oxygen. We're going to have about 6 molecules of oxygen left over. Now, with this note taker on photosynthesis, this is a process you are going to need to know throughout the entire year. We're going to be talking about it in most of our topics this year, especially when we get to 4th 9 weeks and we're talking about how energy has to move through our ecosystem. So we're going to be using this a lot. You need to learn it now. We'll be revisiting it throughout the year. Please don't forget to do the assessment that follows.